assistants for the day, who will be standing here reading this one day, not too far in the future. Joseph, Toby, and Ian, who go to schools in Manchester, Maine, Portland, Maine, and out on Mackworth Island. Gentlemen, are you all ready? When he was a very old man, Thomas Jefferson sent the writing desk on which he drafted the Declaration of Independence to his favorite granddaughter, Ellen, who lived in Boston. And he sent her a letter with it that said, "It is a plain, neat, and convenient small writing desk, but if things acquire a superstitious value because of their connection with particular persons, then surely a connection with the great charter of our independence may give a value to what has been associated with this. Its imaginary value may increase with the years, and if you, my dear, live to my age or another half century, you may see it carried in the procession of our nation's birthday, as the relics of the saints are in those of the church." I think that Mr. Adams and Mr. Jefferson would be very surprised to find that we treasure the paper as much as we do. But I don't think they would at all be surprised to know that we treasure the words as much as we do. In the long list of offenses of the king, the part of the Declaration that's rarely read out loud after the great ringing stanzas that are its preface, you will find a reference to the burning of Falmouth, Portland, Maine, our town, which was burned by the British on the 18th of October, 1775. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, of course, served on the committee that wrote the document, and the only American towns that had been shelled from the sea and burned by the British at that point were Norfolk, Virginia, Charleston, Massachusetts, and Portland, District of Maine. So you can imagine that those three events were carefully put into the document by those two people especially. I'll indicate to you when we get to that point that refers to us. Important to remember, too, what the document meant in those days. The first rebellion of English peoples against the king, who they've been very careful not to criticize up until this day. It's been Parliament's fault for all of the acts that had been unjustifiably taxing us with representation, without representation. And now it is the king's fault. A document like this means there is no going back. Remember, it was treason to write it, treason to sign it, treason to read it out loud, treason to stand and listen to it. So, here we are for the 237th time. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled when, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have thus far connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind require that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such forms as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they have become accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused to assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodations of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of our public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions from within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and ratifying the conditions of new appropriations of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws or establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and hence sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out our substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a justification foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering troops in large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by mock trials from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and a fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. 4, taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. 4, suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete these works of death and desolation and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their own country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and attempted to bring upon us the inhabitants of our frontiers, whose known rules of warfare and an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these operations, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in affections to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice, their magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voices of justice and consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold all mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved now from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conduct peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all the other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the purpose of support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. Signed, in order, and in behalf of the Congress of the United States, assembled, John Hancock, President, Philadelphia, July 4th, 1776.